Annabel came to him with a surprise. He had never mentioned how much he needed new shoes, but Annabel had noticed. "I broke open my piggy bank," she explained, her voice soft but full of pride. "I wanted to get you new shoes so you can feel better." Tears welled up in Norman's eyes as he held the shoes. He knelt down and hugged his daughter tightly. "Thank you, Annabel. You're a gift, you know that?" Through the Eyes of a Child. A story that changed the lives of many people. In a peaceful suburban neighborhood in Colorado, the family of Norman, Barbara, and their young daughter Annabel lived in a house gifted to Barbara by her late parent. It was a modest home, filled with memories of better times. Barbara, now 8 months pregnant with their second child, often said the house was more than just walls and a roof. It was a sanctuary, a place where love and family had blossomed. Yet, life had not always been easy for them, and Norman, a writer by trade, struggled with the pressure to provide for his growing family. One spring afternoon, the air warm and sweet with the scent of blooming flowers, the family gathered in the backyard. Norman, with his laptop open, sat at a weathered wooden table attempting to write his next novel. Writing was his passion, but lately it felt like a daunting task, especially given the weight of his responsibilities. Beside him, Barbara, pregnant and glowing with the calm of motherhood, tended to her garden. She smiled as she gently pulled weeds from around the bright flowers that filled the yard. Their daughter, Annabel, played nearby in the sandbox, absorbed in a world of her own as she built sandcastles and talked to her imaginary friends. The peaceful afternoon was shattered when Barbara suddenly doubled over in pain. She gasped, clutching her stomach as her face went pale. Norman's heart raced with panic as he rushed to her side. "Barbara, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice shaking. I don't know, Norman. It hurts so much," she replied, her voice trembling. Without hesitation, Norman ran to Annabel. "Call an ambulance, sweetheart, quickly," he urged. Annabel, only 6 years old but always quick to act, picked up the phone and dialed the emergency number. Within minutes, the paramedics arrived and rushed Barbara to the hospital. In the sterile, cold hospital room, Norman was told that Barbara's condition was serious. The doctors explained that they would need to perform an emergency cesarean to save the baby. Norman's heart pounded in his chest, filled with dread. He paced the hospital waiting room, praying that both Barbara and the baby would survive. Hours passed like days, and his mind was consumed with anxiety and fear. Finally, the doctors returned with news. Both the baby girl and Barbara had survived the surgery. But Barbara hadn't made it. Norman's world shattered as the doctor delivered the devastating news. His wife, his partner, was gone. His thoughts turned immediately to their newborn daughter, who was safe but would grow up without knowing the love of her mother. The weight of the loss was overwhelming, and Norman struggled to hold it together. In the months that followed, Norman did everything he could to raise his 2 daughters alone. Annabel, despite her young age, was mature beyond her years. She understood that her mother was never coming back, and she often comforted Norman during his darkest moments. There were times when she would sit by his side and quietly hold his hand as he cried. She had already begun to take on a caretaker role, helping him with daily tasks and always trying to make him smile, even when his heart was breaking. The younger daughter, Barbara, named after her mother, was a constant reminder of the life they had lost. Her eyes sparkled with a quiet, innocent wonder, and every time Norman looked at her, he saw his wife in the way Barbara smiled. He could never bring himself to call her anything else but Barbara, even though she was still a tiny baby. In those precious moments, Norman found solace in the new life he was entrusted to protect. The family struggled through the tough month. Norman worked endlessly, often staying up late at night trying to finish his latest book, hoping that the advance would be enough to keep the family afloat. When money was tight, he took on odd jobs, sometimes working late-night shifts as a janitor or handyman just to make ends meet. It wasn't easy, but Norman was determined to provide for his daughters, even if it meant sacrificing his health and well-being. Annabel was a quiet observer, often sitting beside her father as he worked, offering her small words of encouragement when he seemed to be at his lowest. She understood that their situation was difficult, but she always believed that they would make it through. One day, Annabel came to him with a surprise. He had never mentioned how much he needed new shoes, but Annabel had noticed. "I broke open my piggy bank," she explained, her voice soft but full of pride. "I wanted to get you new shoes so you can feel better." Tears welled up in Norman's eyes as he held the shoes. He knelt down and hugged his daughter tightly. "Thank you, Annabel. You're a gift, you know that?" Meanwhile, little Barbara, just starting to talk, would often babble in her sweet voice, mimicking her father's actions. She had developed a routine with him. Each morning she would bring him his coffee, handing it to him with a beaming smile, just as her mother used to. Norman would kiss the top of her head and tell her she was his little sunshine. Even in the hardest times, these simple moments of love kept him going. But the pressure of it all began to take its toll on Norman. He was constantly exhausted, struggling to keep up with work, raising his daughters, and paying bills that never seemed to stop arriving. He began to feel weak, his body aching from the unrelenting stress. His nosebleeds became more frequent, and his energy was drained. It wasn't until one evening, when his dizziness became unbearable, that Norman decided to visit the doctor. The diagnosis was chilling. The tests indicated possible cancer. The doctor suggested further tests and immediate treatment, but Norman couldn't afford it. He knew that the costs would be too much, and he couldn't afford to take time off work. So, he continued to push through, knowing that his daughters depended on him. His father, George, lived a life of luxury. As the CEO of one of the largest companies in the state, George had everything he could ever want, except for the relationship he had always craved with his son. George had been harsh, critical, and demanding throughout Norman's childhood. When Norman was 10, he brought a homeless man home, hoping to help him. His father had been furious, scolding him for being naive and foolish. From that moment on, their relationship was fractured beyond repair. For years, George had no idea where Norman was or what happened to him. But as Norman's health deteriorated, something inside George stirred. A strange feeling of regret and sorrow crept over him. It was as if he suddenly realized what he had lost, the son he had cast aside in favor of his business empire. What if Norman had children? Grandchildren? What if he could make things right? Determined to find Norman, George set his aides to work. But by the time they located him, it was too late. Norman had passed away. The news devastated George. He could never forgive himself for not reconciling with his son. But now, with his granddaughters left alone, George vowed to do what he could to make up for his past mistake. He would raise Annabel and Barbara, give them the love and support Norman had wanted for them. He realized that this was his second chance. His chance to do right by his son, even if it was too late for him. As the years passed, Annabel and Barbara grew into strong, compassionate women, shaped by the love and resilience of their father and the support of their grandfather. Annabel, always a quiet observer, developed a passion for art. Her sketchbooks filled with intricate drawings, each page a reflection of the world as she saw it, filled with both beauty and pain. She pursued a degree in fine arts and eventually became a renowned illustrator, her work celebrated for its depth and emotion. Though she never forgot the sacrifices her father made, she found peace in her own way, creating a family of her own with a kind-hearted man named Lucas, whom she met in college. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, who brought joy and laughter to the home Annabel had built. Barbara, who inherited her mother's sunny disposition, grew into an outspoken and determined woman. She was passionate about helping others, often volunteering at local shelters and advocacy groups. Her compassion led her to a career in social work, where she made a significant impact on her community. Like Annabel, she found love, marrying a devoted and supportive partner named Ethan, with whom she had 3 children. Her home was always full of life, her children's laughter echoing the happiness she once felt in her father's embrace. Their grandfather, George, who had never known the joy of a family until his late years, became an integral part of their lives. He poured love into his granddaughters, learning to cherish moments he had once taken for granted. He watched proudly as Annabelle's art was displayed in galleries and as Barbara led social initiatives that changed the lives of many. As they grew, both granddaughters often brought their children to visit him, filling his house with the warmth of young voices. George, now elderly, found solace in the fact that he had been given the chance to make amends, to witness the lives of his grandchildren flourish, and to see the family he had once broken come together again, stronger than ever. Norman's memory lived on in every loving gesture, every shared story, and every cherished moment spent with his daughters and grandchildren. Though he was gone, his legacy endured through them, ensuring that the love he had poured into their lives would never be forgotten. Thank you so much for listening to or watching our story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to our channel, give it a like, and leave a comment to let us know what you think about the story.